The morning sun glinted off the sleek, obsidian lens of my newly installed security camera, and I, Alex, the self-proclaimed monarch of this aggressively beige suburban castle, felt a profound sense of accomplishment. My kingdom, usually assailed by nothing more menacing than rogue dandelions and the relentless chirping of unseen cicadas, was now officially under surveillance. I took a triumphant sip of my lukewarm coffee, the mug emblazoned with a cartoon badger wearing a monocle, and surveyed my domain. Let's be clear, I'm not some tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist. My reasons were purely principled. A week prior, a package containing the sacred, the glorious, the ridiculously expensive ergonomic mouse I'd been coveting for months vanished from this very porch. Vanished! Like a magician's rabbit. But instead of applause, there was only the hollow ache of unfulfilled click-and-scroll dreams. It wasn't about the money. Amazon refunded it instantly. It was about the audacity. The sheer unmitigated gall of someone swiping my future carpal tunnel preventing device. So, the camera went up. A silent, unblinking guardian against the injustices of porch piracy. I'm Alex, by the way. Early 30s, graphic designer, perpetually tethered to my home office. My life motto usually revolves around minimal effort, maximum comfort. I value my peace and quiet like a dragon values its hoard. My neighborhood, Maple Avenue, is a testament to suburban conformity. Every house a slightly different shade of off-white, every lawn meticulously mown, except mine occasionally. Every day a predictable rhythm of leaf blowers and distant ice cream truck jingles. It was for the most part peacefully anonymous. That is, until you introduced Carol. Carol, my next-door neighbor, was the exception that proved the rule of suburban tranquility. She moved in about 5 years ago, and from the moment her perfectly coiffed, "I demand to speak to your manager," haircut bobbed over our shared property line, I knew my life was about to get textured. She walked with a stiff, purposeful gait, like a highly decorated general inspecting a faulty parade. Her eyes, I swear, scanned for imperfections, for deviations from her unspoken code of suburban conduct. My grass once dared to grow a quarter-inch beyond HOA guidelines, and I received a passive-aggressive note tucked under my windshield wiper that read, in elegant cursive, "A healthy lawn reflects a healthy community." My personal favorite was the time she complained my exterior trim was not the correct shade of eggshell. Eggshell? Who even notices that? These, however, were minor skirmishes. Annoying, yes, but easily dismissed as the eccentricities of a woman with too much time on her hands and an inexplicable passion for monochromatic exterior paint. I'd learned to nod, smile faintly, and then do precisely nothing. My strategy was always to out-polite her, to baffle her with a calm demeanor in the face of her escalating indignation. It usually worked, resulting in her stomping off, muttering about unreasonable people. I genuinely believed my camera would simply be another one of those minor irritations, a temporary blip on her radar before she moved on to the next perceived transgression. Oh, how wrong I was. I was just enjoying the satisfying ding of a new email notification, likely another project brief, when the familiar rustle of perfectly pressed slacks and the heavy thud of sensible walking shoes announced her arrival. My front porch, usually a sanctuary of peace, felt a sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. I looked up. There she stood, not quite on my porch, but certainly in striking distance. Her face was a mask of tightly controlled fury, her lips pursed so tightly they almost disappeared. "Excuse me? Excuse me." The words were delivered with the precision of tiny, sharpened daggers. I adopted my most innocent, slightly confused expression. "Carol, hi. Everything okay? You look like you just saw someone put pineapple on a pizza." Her eyes, usually narrowed, widened for a split second in disbelief at my flippancy. Then they snapped to the camera, perched discreetly under the eaves of my porch, a silent sentinel. That thing. She pointed a trembling finger, not at me, but at the device. Her voice vibrated with a righteous indignation usually reserved for grand congressional hearings, not suburban property lines. It's pointing directly into my daughter's bedroom window. I am not having a pervert living next to me. I blinked. My coffee almost performed a comedic spit take. First, I began, raising a hand in a gesture of calm diplomacy. It's a camera, not a thing. Let's stick to proper terminology, shall we? Second, it's a wide-angle lens, but I can assure you it's physically angled to cover my porch and driveway. See the angle? I gestured dramatically towards the slight tilt. Physics, Carol. It's a real thing. Third, your daughter's in college in Vermont, studying something involving interpretive dance and ancient Sumerian texts, last I heard. Unless she's developed a hitherto unknown talent for interdimensional teleportation, her window is currently empty. Carol's face flushed a deeper shade of puce. My logical, albeit snarky, dismantling of her accusation only seemed to fuel her rage. I feel violated, she shrieked, her voice cracking slightly. Invaded! This is an invasion of privacy. I have rights! And I have a right to protect my property from porch pirates, I countered, pulling out my phone. Look, I can even show you the live feed. See? That's my walkway. That's my porch light. And see that tiny sliver of asphalt? That's the very edge of your driveway. Your daughter's old bedroom window isn't even in the same zip code as this camera's view. I held up the phone, confident in my irrefutable evidence. She slapped the phone away with a surprisingly powerful, albeit slightly clumsy swing. I don't care about your little screens. I care about my peace of mind. You have 24 hours to take it down, Alex, or you'll be hearing from the authorities. With that, she spun on her sensible heel, a flurry of indignation, and marched back across her perfectly manicured lawn, leaving me alone with my bewildered badger mug and the silent, unblinking eye of my little camera. I just shook my head, half amused, half annoyed. The authorities, I muttered to the empty air. Right, like they're going to care about a camera that sees a fraction of a driveway. I dismissed it as an empty threat, a final dramatic flourish from the queen of complaint. Oh, how very, very wrong I was. My dismissal of Carol's authorities threat lasted precisely 48 hours. The first salvo, as it turned out, came not from the long arm of the law, but the incredibly short, incredibly bureaucratic arm of the Homeowners Association. I was in the middle of a particularly finicky redesign for a client's artisanal cheese company logo, lots of intricate swirls, surprisingly dramatic typography, when my email pinged with an official-looking subject line, HOA Community Compliance Notification. My heart, usually a placid rhythmic drum, gave a little thrum of annoyance. I knew, with the chilling certainty of a man who'd lived next to Carol for 5 years, precisely who had instigated this. I opened the email. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate jargon. It cited a vague bylaw, something about maintaining neighborhood aesthetic harmony, and unapproved external modifications that disrupt the visual continuity of the community. It was so perfectly Carol, all flowery language designed to obscure the simple fact that she just didn't like my camera. The email was signed by the HOA board secretary, and I knew, again with that chilling certainty, that the secretary was none other than Carol herself. She wasn't just queen of complaint, she was also the empress of bureaucracy. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This was a new level of petty, but I was ready. I opened a new tab, navigated to the HOA's online portal, and pulled up the very document they had vaguely referenced. After a few minutes of scrolling, there it was, in black and white, Section 3. 4.1, subsection G. Security devices, including but not limited to cameras, doorbell systems, and motion-activated lighting, are permitted for the purpose of protecting individual property, provided they do not infringe upon the reasonable privacy of neighboring properties. I then took a screenshot of the relevant section, composed a polite, almost saccharine email thanking them for their diligence, attached the screenshot, and added, "As you can see, my security camera fully complies with all stated HOA guidelines. Have a nice day." I hit send with a flourish, a small, triumphant smile playing on my lips. Point to Alex. The next day, however, was a different story. I was just finishing up my lunch, a gourmet sandwich that was 80% arugula, when there was a knock at my door. Not a gentle rap, but a firm, official-sounding rap. My stomach, which had been perfectly content with its arugula, twisted into a knot. I peered through the peephole. 2 figures in crisp uniforms stood on my porch. My heart sank. The actual authorities. Carol wasn't kidding. I opened the door, attempting to project an aura of calm, reasonable adult. Standing before me were 2 officers from the local police department. One was older, Officer Miller, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weariness of someone who'd seen too many domestic disputes over barking dogs and misplaced garden gnomes. He had tired eyes and a thin, cynical mustache. The other, Officer Ramirez, was younger, sharp, and looked like she took the protect and serve mantra very seriously, even when the threat was a security camera. "Sir, we received a call about a camera," Officer Miller began, his voice a low rumble. "A spy camera, I believe was the term used." He looked at me with an expression that said, "Please tell me this isn't another one of those calls." I sighed. A long, theatrical sigh for dramatic effect. "Ah, Carol. Let me guess. She said I'm using it to steal her secret prize-winning rosebush fertilizer recipe? Or perhaps monitoring her cat's nefarious nocturnal activities?" Officer Ramirez gave me a stern, disapproving look, but Officer Miller, to my surprise, suppressed a small, almost imperceptible chuckle. He quickly covered it with a cough. "Sir, if you could just explain the situation. I invited them in, offered them water, which they politely declined, and led them to my office where I could access the camera's feed." "Officers, this is a standard security camera. I installed it after a package was stolen from my porch. My neighbor, Carol, believes it's spying on her house." I pulled up the live feed on my monitor, pointing out the field of view. As you can see, it covers my porch, my driveway, and just the very edge of her driveway. It absolutely does not, and physically cannot, look into her house. I even played back a few hours of footage, mostly me bringing in groceries, a squirrel attempting to raid my bird feeder, and the mailman looking bewildered by my no soliciting sign. Officer Ramirez, ever the diligent one, stepped outside with me to visually inspect the camera's angle. She squinted, looked through her own phone camera, and seemed satisfied. Officer Miller, meanwhile, just stood there, arms crossed, nodding slowly. He'd probably seen it all. "All right, sir," Miller finally said, adjusting his cap. "Seems pretty clear to us. It's on your property, pointed at your property. Nothing illegal here." They exchanged a few more polite words with me, then walked across my lawn, heading towards Carol's house. I watched from my window, a quiet spectator to the unfolding drama. I saw Miller and Ramirez stand on Carol's porch. Carol came out, her face a thundercloud. There was a brief, animated conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the officers gesture at my camera, then at my house. Then they both just shrugged. A universal gesture of, "Our hands are tied." Carol threw her hands up in exasperation, and the officers, looking thoroughly fed up, simply got back in their patrol car and drove away. I let out a whoop of triumph, a small, solitary victory dance in my living room. 2-0 to Alex. I thought the war was over. I thought Carol, having exhausted all official channels, would finally retreat. My smugness, however, was about to be obliterated by the raw, unadulterated power of 1,000 suns. The next evening, I was engrossed in a particularly challenging level of an indie video game, my office bathed in the dim glow of my monitor, when the world outside my window exploded in light. My room, which had been comfortably dark, was suddenly awash in a harsh, blinding glare. I actually yelped, leaping from my chair like a startled cat. I stumbled to the window, shielding my eyes. There, on Carol's house, now adorned with the subtlety of a prison searchlight, were 3 brand-new industrial-grade motion-activated floodlights. They weren't just bright. They were designed to illuminate entire football fields. And they were all, every single one of them, angled to blast directly into my office and bedroom windows. Every time a car drove by, every time a leaf twirled to the ground, every time a rogue gust of wind stirred a bush, my house was engulfed in an artificial, retina-searing noon. My peaceful work-from-home existence became a nightmare. My video calls were reduced to me appearing as a washed-out, ghostly figure against a backdrop of blinding white. My sleep schedule disintegrated. I tried blackout curtains, but the sheer intensity of the light seemed to penetrate even the thickest fabric, turning my bedroom into a permanent, unwanted dawn. I tried talking to Carol again, braving the glare. "Carol, those lights are incredibly powerful. They're shining directly into my house. I can't sleep." She just stood on her porch, a triumphant, almost beatific smile on her face, bathed in the unholy glow of her own creation. "Oh, really?" she purred, her voice dripping with mock innocence. "I'm just protecting my property, Alex. You know, from things. Like perhaps overzealous bird watchers, or maybe a man in a tower who feels his privacy is being invaded by a small, harmless camera." She chuckled, a low, malicious sound. I stood there, defeated, blinded by her spite. The pettiness had escalated. This wasn't just about a camera anymore. This was about control. This was about Carol reminding me with every blast of light who she thought truly ran this neighborhood. That night, lying in bed, a pillow clamped over my head, but still feeling the insistent glow of those infernal floodlights through my eyelids, a strange clarity dawned. My mind, usually focused on kerning and color palettes, began to churn with a potent blend of rage and sleep deprivation. "She feels watched by a tiny passive camera?" my internal monologue raged. "She complains about privacy? Fine. I'll give her something to really feel watched by. A camera is automated, impersonal. What she needs is the human element, the personal touch. She needs an audience." And then it hit me, like a lightning bolt of pure, unadulterated spite, the most ridiculous, extravagant, gloriously over-the-top idea I'd ever conceived. My sleepless, agitated brain latched onto it with manic glee. "A security guard," I whispered into my pillow, a giggle bubbling up. "In a tower, a watchtower." It was stupid. It was probably illegal. It was definitely expensive. But oh, my sweet suburban revenge fantasy, it was absolutely perfect. The floodlights clicked on again, blasting my room. And this time I started laughing. A long, low, slightly unhinged laugh that echoed in the blinding artificial light. Carol had no idea what she had just started. The morning after my blinding epiphany, I emerged from my bedroom, a little sleep-deprived but brimming with the kind of manic energy that only comes from committing to a truly outrageous plan. The first step in building a watchtower, as I understood it, was to ensure I wouldn't immediately land myself in legal trouble. This required research, lots of it. I brewed the strongest coffee known to man, put on my serious thinking glasses, the ones with the slightly smudged lenses, and plunged headfirst into the labyrinthine world of city ordinances, building codes, and of course, the ever-present, ever-vigilant HOA bylaws. My computer screen glowed with official PDFs, legal jargon, and architectural diagrams. Hours blurred. My initial optimism, fueled by pure spite, began to wane slightly. This was complicated. But then, like a shining beacon in the bureaucratic fog, I found it. A glorious, beautiful loophole, tucked away in a dusty corner of the zoning regulations. Any freestanding accessory structure under 150 square feet, in footprint and under 15 feet in overall height, does not require a specific building permit, provided it adheres to property line setbacks. My eyes widened. 150 square feet, 15 feet tall. That was practically a small house. It was essentially classified as a shed, a really, really tall shed. And the HOA rules, after a thorough word-by-word dissection, were equally vague on raised garden sheds or observation platforms for amateur bird-watching. Nothing explicitly forbade it. Nothing. The closest they had was a rule against permanent outdoor structures over 10 feet tall that obstruct the scenic views of neighboring properties. But my property had no scenic views to obstruct, unless you counted Carol's prize-winning petunias. And anyway, a 10-foot-high structure with a 10-foot setback was totally fine. My tower would be exactly 14 feet, 11 inches tall, well within the shed exemption. I printed out the relevant documents, multiple copies, highlighting the precise sections with a neon yellow marker. A triumphant, slightly unhinged grin spread across my face. It was legal. Oh, it was so gloriously legal. Now, for the fun part, finding someone to actually build this monument to malicious compliance. I started calling contractors, a list pulled from Yelp and Google Maps. "Hi, I'm looking to get a quote for a new structure on my property." "Sure, what kind of structure?" "Well, it's sort of a shed, but elevated, with a lot of windows, and a ladder." Pause. "Sir, are you looking for a treehouse?" "Not exactly. More like a very sturdy, high-end, strategically placed observation platform." Click, dial tone. Most of them either hung up, laughed, or politely suggested I consult a psychiatrist. My resolve was starting to waver. Was this too insane? Was I truly going to spend thousands of dollars just to annoy my neighbor? Yes, Alex, yes you are. This is beyond annoyance now. This is a matter of principle. Just as I was about to give up and consider building it myself, which, given my carpentry skills, would undoubtedly result in a wonky, leaning death trap, I found Gus. Gus, owner of Gus's Dependable Decks and Fences. His website featured photos of robust, no-nonsense wooden structures. His phone answered with a gravelly voice that sounded like it had been marinated in whiskey and sawdust. "Gus's Decks, what you need?" "Mr. Gus," I began, adopting a serious, professional tone. "I'm looking to construct a rather unique, custom-built, raised structure on my property. It's about 10 by 10 feet, and it needs to be about 15 feet off the ground, with a sturdy ladder access and windows on all 4 sides." There was a long silence on the other end, punctuated by the faint sound of what I assumed was a saw. Then, Gus's voice, raspy and slow. "So, let me get this straight. You want a 10x10 shed, but, like, on stilts, with windows on all 4 sides and a ladder—" "Exactly!" I practically shouted, relief flooding through me. "Think of it as a luxury deer stand for observing the local wildlife, very specific local wildlife." Another long pause. I could almost hear Gus mulling it over, the gears of his experienced, practical mind grinding away. "What kind of wildlife we talking about?" "The particularly noisy, meddlesome kind," I replied, a smirk playing on my lips. Gus let out a hearty, surprisingly loud guffaw. "Ha! All right, kid. This sounds like a story. You got pictures? Plans?" I arranged for Gus to come over that afternoon. He pulled up in a beat-up Ford pickup, a man in his 60s with a weather-beaten face, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a perpetual smudge of sawdust on his cheek. I showed him my carefully prepared documents, the highlighted bylaws, the crude sketch I'd made of my raised observation shed. I pointed out Carol's floodlights, still dormant in the afternoon sun, but looming like silent, plastic harbingers of retinal damage. I explained the whole sordid tale, from the stolen ergonomic mouse to the HOA letter to the blinding retaliation. Gus listened patiently, occasionally grunting or nodding. When I finished, he looked from my house to Carol's, then up at the sky. Then he looked at me, a wide grin spreading across his face. He extended a calloused hand. "Kid, for a job this funny, I'll give you a discount. This ain't just construction, this is art. Malicious compliance art." He shook my hand, and just like that, the watchtower dream became a concrete, or rather very wooden, plan. We hammered out the details, treated lumber, solid foundation, proper bracing, a secure ladder, and windows that would maximize observation capabilities. The following week, Maple Avenue, usually a symphony of lawnmowers and distant dog barks, was treated to a new, more industrial soundtrack. The build began. Day one, the foundation. A flatbed truck arrived, groaning under the weight of lumber. Gus and his two stoic, burly crew members, Dave and Mike, set to work. The rhythmic thud of sledgehammers as they drove in the concrete piers for the posts filled the air. Carol, true to form, was out on her lawn within minutes, ostensibly tending to her prize-winning petunias, but her eyes, I noted, kept darting towards the nascent construction. She peered, suspicious, like a hawk spotting a particularly plump vole. Day two, the frame goes up. The support posts, thick and sturdy, rose quickly. Then the joists. Suddenly, there was a visible, undeniable structure taking shape in my backyard. It was unmistakably vertical. Carol was on her lawn again, arms crossed, filming with her phone. I saw her attempt to engage Dave, who, following Gus's strict instructions, merely offered a polite, non-committal grunt and continued to nail lumber. Carol's face, even from a distance, was a study in rising indignation. Day four, the roof and walls. By now the structure looked undeniably like a tower. It had a roof, it had walls. The window cutouts were obvious. It was no longer a raised shed. It was a watchtower. And Carol knew it. I was supervising, mostly by bringing the crew cold drinks and asking profoundly unhelpful questions, when she marched to the fence line, her face a furious crimson. "I know what you're doing!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the whirring of the saw. "You'll never get away with this. I'll call the HOA. I'll call the city. I'll call everyone." I leaned against a freshly cut beam, affecting a casual air. "It's for bird-watching, Carol," I yelled back good-naturedly, a wide, innocent smile plastered on my face. "The Audubon Society would be so proud. I hear there's a rare species of finch that loves elevated platforms." Gus, who was nailing a roof truss, let out a snort of laughter that turned into a cough. Carol just sputtered, defeated by my cheerful absurdity, and retreated indoors, slamming her door with a seismic shudder. The final touches involved the ladder, a sturdy, professional-grade aluminum one, securely bolted, and the installation of the windows, giving the tower an almost collegiate academic feel. It stood proudly, a sentinel of lumber and glass towering over my yard. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive architecture. Now that the tower was built, I needed a tenant, a guardian, a watcher. I posted a job online. Property observation specialist, daytime hours, mon-free. Must possess excellent observational skills, discretion, and a calm demeanor. Experience with peaceful, long-term surveillance A+. I received a surprisingly diverse range of applications. The first applicant was a terrifying ex-military type, with a shaved head and intense eyes. My tactical training would be invaluable, he'd stated, stroking an invisible beard. I can neutralize any perceived threat within a 50-foot radius. What's the threat assessment level? I gently explained the threat was a lady with a leaf blower and a bad attitude. He looked profoundly disappointed and left, probably to find a more high-stakes gig. The second applicant fell asleep halfway through my explanation of the job duties. Then came Barry. Barry arrived precisely on time, a slightly portly, silver-haired man in his mid-60s, wearing a tweed jacket that looked like it had seen many years of respectful service. He exuded an aura of gentle serenity, like a benevolent grandfather who also happened to be a connoisseur of ancient texts. He was, it turned out, a semi-retired university librarian. "So, Mr. Barry," I began, trying to sound as professional as possible, given the ludicrous nature of the job. "To be clear, your primary duties will be to sit, observe, and log. The threat level, as you may have gathered, is fairly low. The main requirement is to be conspicuously visible, to be an unmistakable, constant presence." Barry's eyes, magnified by his wire-rimmed glasses, twinkled. "So, let me understand this," he said, his voice soft and thoughtful. "I get paid to sit in a quiet, elevated space with a panoramic view, read my books, drink tea, and occasionally write a sentence or two in a logbook about whatever occurs outside." "That's the gist of it," I confirmed, bracing myself for the polite refusal. Barry leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "Son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that's not a job. That's my retirement dream." I nearly hugged him. Barry was hired on the spot. I explained the whole Carol saga, omitting none of the petty details. He listened, utterly delighted. "A watchtower against suburban tyranny," he declared, chuckling softly. "What a splendid idea, Alex." He was perfect, utterly, ridiculously perfect. Carol had no idea what was coming. The tower was built. The watcher was found. The stage was set. The watchtower, gleaming in its fresh coat of weather-resistant paint, stood like a proud, slightly bewildered giraffe amidst the manicured lawns of Maple Avenue. I'd spent the previous evening making it as comfortable and functional as possible for Barry. Inside, it boasted a surprisingly ergonomic office chair, a small, insulated mini-fridge stocked with various herbal teas, and my personal stash of emergency chocolate bars, a power strip for Barry's phone and Kindle, and a pair of high-end binoculars. "For optimal birdwatching, of course," I'd told Barry with a wink. The crowning glory was the official observation log, a sturdy leather-bound notebook with crisp blank pages. Barry arrived for his first shift precisely at 8:55 a.m. on a Monday, dressed in a crisp, dark blue polo shirt that I had sourced online, emblazoned with a discreet, almost unnoticeable patch that read, "Maple Avenue Property Watch." He looked less like a security guard and more like a very distinguished, slightly overqualified substitute teacher. He beamed, a childlike delight in his eyes, as he surveyed his new domain. He climbed the ladder with surprising agility for a man his age, settled into the chair, and after pouring himself a cup of chamomile tea from a thermos, opened his logbook. The air thrummed with anticipation. This was it. The moment of truth. Around 10:10 a.m., the garage door next door rumbled open. Carol, perfectly coiffed, emerged, dressed in her gardening attire, armed with a tiny trowel and a look of grim determination, ready to tackle a particularly stubborn patch of weeds. She made her way to her mailbox, pulled out a handful of flyers, and started to turn back. That's when she saw him. Barry. He was sitting in the watchtower, serene, composed, framed perfectly by one of the large windows. He was holding his binoculars, not pointed at her, but towards a distant oak tree, as if observing a rare species of squirrel. As Carol's head slowly swiveled upwards, her eyes widened, her mouth fell open slightly. Barry, following our prearranged protocol, slowly lowered his binoculars, looked directly at her, and offered a gentle, polite nod of acknowledgement. Then, without breaking his composed demeanor, he returned to his bird-watching. Carol froze. She stood there, a mail-stuffed hand mid-air, a statue of utter disbelief. Her face went from shock to a slow, burning red. She looked at the tower, then back at her house, then back at the tower. Barry, I noted from my own office window, casually made an entry in his logbook. I imagined it read something like, 10:14 a.m. Subject is expressing vocal discontent in the yard, likely in silent protest. Observed a common robin quite plump. The first shift was a resounding success. Carol retreated indoors, her gardening plans apparently forgotten. The floodlights remained mercifully off. The next day, it escalated. Carol started by screaming from her own lawn. "Are you kidding me, Alex? A tower? And a man?" Her voice was a high-pitched shriek, ricocheting off the other houses. Barry, bless his librarian heart, simply made an entry in his log. 10:14 a.m. Subject is expressing vocal discontent in the yard. Volume levels elevated. Appears agitated by my presence. Continued observation of a northern cardinal, quite splendid plumage today. He then waved politely to a mailman who looked utterly bewildered by the entire scene. This was it. The point of no return. The climactic battle of wits, or rather the climactic battle of escalating absurdity. Carol called the police again. This time I knew they would come, and this time I was ready. I was on a call with a client when I saw the familiar black and white cruiser pull up. Two of them, Officers Miller and Ramirez. Miller, the older, world-weary one, stepped out of the car, took one look at the watchtower, then at my house, then back at the tower, and let out a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to contain the collective suffering of every suburban police officer who had ever dealt with a petty neighbor dispute. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since their last visit. Officer Ramirez, ever the professional, approached my door. I met her on the porch, a perfectly composed smile on my face. "Officers, welcome back. To what do I owe the pleasure? Are we discussing the proper angle for a security camera again, or have we moved on to the legality of a bird-watching platform?" Officer Miller, rubbing his temples, walked slowly towards my property. "Son," he rumbled, his voice weary beyond measure. "You built a watchtower." "It's a raised observation shed, officer," I corrected him, pulling out my carefully highlighted printouts of the city ordinances and HOA bylaws. Fully compliant with City Code 14B, subsection C, regarding accessory structures. I have the paperwork right here. I held up the thick stack of papers like a shield. At that moment, Carol, who had obviously been waiting for the police, burst out of her house. She practically slid to a halt on the sidewalk, her face a grotesque mask of fury and indignation. "He has a man in there!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the watchtower. "A spy! He's watching my every move! This is harassment! This is intimidation! This is—" "Ma'am, please calm down," Officer Ramirez interjected, her voice firm. "Calm down? How can I calm down when there's a pervert in a tower watching me?" Officer Miller, looking like he was moments away from retirement, sighed again, then looked at me. "Is there a man in that tower, sir?" "Yes, officer," I replied, meeting his gaze evenly. "That's Barry. He's my employee, a property observation specialist, as per his job description. He's on duty observing my property." I paused. "And the local flora and fauna, of course. He's quite fond of the blue jays." Miller exchanged a look with Ramirez. They both looked utterly bewildered. "Can we speak to your employee, sir?" Miller asked. "Of course," I said, gesturing towards the latter. "He's very polite. Might even offer you some Earl Grey." Officer Miller, with a deep sigh, approached the watchtower ladder. He paused, looked up, and I saw Barry, ever composed, peering down at him with a gentle, questioning look. Miller slowly, carefully, ascended the ladder. Ramirez remained below, keeping a wary eye on Carol, who was now vibrating with barely contained rage. A few minutes later, Miller descended, looking even more flummoxed than before. He had a faint smile on his face. "Your employee," he said to me, shaking his head. "He offered me tea, showed me his logbook, has entries about a lovely northern cardinal and subject expressing vocal discontent. Said he's mainly focused on bird migratory patterns." He paused, then added, "Seems like a perfectly nice fellow." Miller then turned to Carol, who was practically seething. "Ma'am," he began, his voice devoid of any further patience. "We've investigated. Again, it's an unusual structure, yes? But it's on his property, it's legally compliant with all city and HOA ordinances. And that man is his employee. He is legally allowed to have an employee on his property. He is not breaking any laws. There is nothing we can do." Carol's jaw dropped. She stood there, frozen again, her accusations dying on her lips. She stared, speechless, first at Officer Miller, then at Officer Ramirez, then slowly, agonizingly, at the watchtower, where Barry was calmly sipping a cup of tea, a serene smile on his face, looking out at the world. The police car pulled away, leaving Carol alone on the sidewalk, a solitary, defeated figure in the face of my utterly ridiculous, entirely legal, and perfectly staffed watchtower. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. My victory was complete. The days that followed Officer Miller's final, exasperated pronouncement were, for lack of a better word, surreal. Carol, utterly defeated, retreated into her fortress. Her industrial-grade floodlights, once a blinding symbol of her petty tyranny, remained mercifully off. Her blinds were permanently drawn, transforming her house into a brooding, secretive structure that hinted at a reclusive, slightly unhinged occupant. A quiet, tense, yet undeniably peaceful truce settled over the two houses. The watchtower, majestic and absurd, was now just a fact of life on Maple Avenue. The rest of the neighborhood reacted, predictably, in varied and humorous ways. Some of my other neighbors, particularly those who had also suffered under Carol's HOA reign, would discreetly slow their cars as they drove by, offering me a subtle nod or a thumbs up. Mr. Henderson from across the street, a man who rarely spoke above a whisper, actually stopped by one evening, ostensibly to borrow a cup of sugar. As I handed it to him, he leaned in conspiratorially and muttered, "That woman once complained my lawn gnomes were too provocative. You're a hero, Alex." Then he scurried away. A group of teenagers from down the street, forever in search of new and amusing online content, started filming TikToks about the warlord of Maple Avenue and his Eye of Sauron, which, to my amusement, was the tower. I had inadvertently become a local suburban legend, the guy who, when pushed too far, went nuclear with pure, unadulterated, legalistic spite. It was glorious. But the true joy, the unexpected bonus of this ridiculous endeavor, was Barry. Life in the tower for Barry was, by all accounts, idyllic. He settled into his routine with the comfortable ease of a seasoned academic. Every morning he'd arrive, climb the ladder, brew his tea, and open his logbook. He'd bring different books to read each day, thick tomes on ancient history, classic literature, even a few bird identification guides. I'd often bring him snacks, sometimes a homemade muffin, sometimes a gourmet chocolate bar. Our conversations through the open window of the tower became one of the unexpected highlights of my day. "Anything exciting to report today, Barry?" I'd ask, looking up. "Indeed, Alex," he'd respond, his voice calm and resonant. "A fascinating squabble unfolded this morning between a particularly aggressive squirrel and a very determined blue jay over a rogue acorn. The squirrel emerged victorious, but the blue jay's linguistic repertoire was truly something to behold." He'd then read an entry from his log. Monday, 2:15 p.m. Subject's cat, a fluffy ginger tabby, has breached the perimeter. It is not deemed a threat. It is, in fact, quite adorable. Observed it attempting to stalk a butterfly with limited success. Or, another time, with a twinkle in his eye. Wednesday, 11 a.m. Subject engaged in aggressive weeding near the fence line. The petunias, regrettably, did not survive the encounter. Noted a faint tremor in the ground, possibly from the sheer force of horticultural indignation. Barry became more than just a security guard. He became the benevolent, all-seeing eye of the block. He'd wave to the kids on their way to school, who'd enthusiastically wave back, utterly captivated by the man in the tower. He helped the mailman spot a loose dog. He even once directed a lost delivery driver to the correct house, saving an important package from an unknown fate. His presence, rather than being intimidating, somehow brought a strange sense of calm to our little cul-de-sac. He was the quiet, constant observer, the gentle sentry of suburbia. Months passed. The initial shock of the watchtower faded, replaced by its comfortable, if still slightly absurd, presence. I'd even started growing some ivy around its base, hoping to make it look a bit more rustic and less like something out of a medieval siege. The leaves were just beginning to unfurl, creating a soft green curtain around the sturdy wooden posts. One late afternoon, I was outside, watering my petunias, which, ironically, were thriving under the reduced glare from next door. The air was warm, smelling of freshly cut grass and impending summer rain. Then, Carol's garage door rumbled open. She emerged, dressed in ordinary street clothes, presumably heading out to run errands. She walked towards her car, her usual rigid posture slightly softened. As she reached her driver's side door, she paused. My watering can paused. We made eye contact across our lawns. No screaming, no accusations, no indignation. Just a long, silent moment. She looked at me, then up at the tower, where Barry was peacefully reading, a sunbeam glinting off his glasses. Her shoulders slumped, almost imperceptibly. Then she gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a friendly nod, not by a long shot. It was a nod of exhaustion, a nod of surrender, a nod that, in its silent eloquence, said, "You win." She got into her car, started the engine, and slowly, quietly, drove away. I stood there, watering can still in hand, a sense of utter bewilderment washing over me. All that effort, all that money, all that absurd, escalating pettiness, for a nod, a single, almost invisible nod of defeat. I looked up at the watchtower, where Barry, oblivious to the momentous, unspoken truce, simply turned a page in his book. I shook my head, a slow smile spreading across my face. It had been an insane ride, a completely over-the-top, financially questionable, yet undeniably hilarious and ultimately effective journey into the heart of suburban warfare. I realized I hadn't just won a fight with my neighbor. I'd accidentally created a wonderful, paying job for a lovely old man. I'd added a bizarre, yet oddly charming landmark to our street. And in doing so, I had, against all odds, achieved something truly rare in this aggressively beige neighborhood: a lasting, if slightly uneasy, peace. The quiet I had craved for so long was finally mine. They say good fences make good neighbors. Turns out, a fully staffed watchtower, towering over your petty grievances, does the job even better. A lot better.